All right, my dear BIBLEin365 brothers and sisters, we have now embarked upon the book of First Chronicles. And I gotta just tell you, I know I said this when we went through Hoshea, I am so proud of you. You are past the 200-day mark, and you are doing an incredible job. And boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, does this book provide an incredible opportunity to immensely grow your knowledge of the Old Testament and Jewish history, like all at once, including the political arena and including everything else that goes with it. Why? Because First Chronicles actually deals particularly with the reign of King David. Now, this is a very, very important aspect of our review because you need to understand, unlike last year, this year I'm going through a review of each book with the intent to give you data to look at in order to better enhance your general knowledge of the scriptures and the areas that surround the scriptures you're studying. If you want to look for a sort of a general summary of each book, you can go to the series that I did last year. The other thing that you can also do is go through any of my teachings that are on jameskadis.com. I teach through the whole Bible, in many cases, multiple times, in some cases 5 or 6 times, and you will be blessed by all of the additional insight that you gain from it. But understand this. When you go through First Chronicles, you need to use First Chronicles as your opportunity to build and develop an understanding of some of the familial relationships that existed leading up to the time of David and the people that surrounded David's time. And you also need to use it as your opportunity to become deeply familiar with the rule of King David, because when you do that, you're going to have a better precedent established for knowing the rest of the history of the nation of Israel, and it becomes significant. So when we start getting into First Chronicles, we get into genealogies, and the prominent genealogies that we need to be looking at are in the first 9 chapters. Now, this is very important because you are looking at the sort of hereditary variables that exist with the prominence of David as king, which is very important. And what's even more important is to understand the relationship that had to not only the priesthood, but to the kingly line. And this is particularly important because when you start looking at where Jesus came from and what tribe he came from, if you don't know this genealogy, you're going to struggle with understanding the depth of the information you're going to get out of the book of Hebrews. So this is very, very important. By the way, this also becomes significant in understanding the genealogies that you will read at the beginning of Luke and Matthew, especially Matthew. So you're going to want to get into it. Now, some tips on learning some genealogy stuff: draw out the family trees. It will actually help. People don't do this. Don't rely on these items being drawn out for you. Draw them out, because in drawing them out, you're going to have a better understanding of the familial relationships and the significance that they bear leading up to the time of King David's birth. I'll give you a great example of this. If you want to understand how God can take the most basic and difficult of situations and use them for his good and his glory, just look at the genealogy associated with Ruth and Boaz, for example. If you remember, Ruth lost her husband, did not have any children as a result of it, and then through the story of the kinsman redeemer, she marries a person by the name of Boaz. Now, there's some real significant stuff that happens there, especially when we learn about Naomi and we learn about the story of what happens. And what's so particularly incredible is when Ruth comes together with Boaz, they have a baby by the name of Obed. Obed has a baby by the name of Jesse, and Jesse has a baby by the name of David, right? So if you understand these genealogies, you're going to have a better appreciation for the stories that follow them. So write out a family tree, right? If you can do so. The other thing I would recommend you doing is looking up the definitions of some of these names. When you look up the definitions of some of these names, you're going to get a better understanding of the history and culture associated with it, because in Hebrew culture and in Middle Eastern culture, we give people names oftentimes associated with particular characteristics that are observed in them either at birth or before birth, maybe something that's sensed, or maybe has something to do with the story of their birth. And so this is a very important characteristic. For example, my name is James. In Hebrew, we say Yaob, which means heel catcher. It kind of means that my parents somehow observed within me city slicking, conniving sort of aspect of the way that I function, and perhaps that might be attributed to the variables associated with my capacity to be able to speak in a unique way. I don't know, but the reality of it is when you look up these names, you're going to understand some history associated with these families, and it becomes very, very valuable, right? And then, of course, when you get into 1 Chronicles chapters 10 through 12, you will see the documentation of David becoming or being made king. He ruled, by the way, they believe anywhere from 1011 BC all the way to 970 or 969 BC. So that's very interesting when you think about that. Then, of course, Solomon takes over. And then when you get into 1 Chronicles 13 through 16, you will learn about the Ark of the Covenant and how it was transported and being brought to Jerusalem. And then this is when you will get another recount of David's plan to build the temple. But what is perhaps the most powerful aspect of this plan to actually build the temple was that David knew he couldn't build the temple, but he still had a massive part in actually building it because he got all the raw materials together and he set up a plan, which should talk to us about the dangers of procrastination versus the blessings that oftentimes come with preparation. And there's some great stuff there. And then, of course, 1 Chronicles 18 through 20, we'll talk about some of the victories David had. When you get into 1 Chronicles 21 and partially into 22, you will see that the people of Israel were numbered. That becomes significant because it allows us to develop an understanding of the size of the nation in that current moment. And that helps us to better understand some things that we will see later on in 2 Chronicles and, of course, in the book of the Kings, which become very, very important. And then, of course, we continue to see the chronicling of David preparing for the temple in 22, and that's something to very much look at. And then here's the thing that I really want you to pay attention to, okay? You really need to focus on this. It's so critical. In 1 Chronicles 23, 24, and 25, you are going to see documentation as into what the duties of the Levites were, meaning the priests, right? What they were supposed to do and how they were organized in the priesthood. Now, this is important because this has some huge significance related to lots of passages around the Bible. Matthew, in the Psalms, all over the place. This becomes very important, especially in Isaiah and Hebrews, many other areas. Knowing this is going to make a significant difference. Now, if you are interested in military culture and you're thinking about geopolitics and that type of thing, 1 Chronicles 27 is something you need to focus on because it's going to talk to us about David's commanders that he appointed. And I want you to pay special attention to some of the names because it will explain why David got stabbed in the back so much. And it's important to understand the principle that I oftentimes hear Erica talk about when she talks about marriage. Charlie does the same thing, and that is doing something they both did, and that is choosing wisely, right? Very important in government. And then, of course, David's final words in 1 Chronicles 28 and 29 is important. I want you to look at who David actually is during that time because you'll realize he was consistent. But what's even more interesting is you will be able to sense deeply still an intact mentality of a love for God that we can learn a lot from. All right, that was an earful, folks. This is going to be a good one. Enjoy it. God bless you.